So what is a camera and what is the meaning of life? Ian, roll the intro. So this is the review all of you have been waiting for. It's the ROLLEI 35AF. There has been no free gift to us. This camera was purchased purely by me. And I'm going to review this camera from start to finish. This is going to be the most comprehensive review you're going to see, so you can forget about watching all the other reviews out there. Alright, so this is the ROLLEI camera. It comes in this nice box. Of course, we've unboxed it before. When you open it, you'll be greeted with the ROLLEI camera. It will have this lens cap on it. Of course, it comes with its own wrist strap here. When we were loading the camera back in, an unfortunate consequence occurred or result. One of the screws, I found a screw lying inside the box. When I looked into the camera carefully, I realized that the screw had popped out of here. You can compare it with the other side there. This is something that just happened. It didn't happen when I just unboxed it. The camera itself otherwise feels and looks okay. This is the wrist strap. You just have to loop it to the side of the camera here. It also comes with stickers, a few stickers here. These stickers, they are something you can paste. They're just stuff that they normally make or ROLLEI has been making for many years. It comes with a warranty card as well. It came with this tab that's not really a sticker. It kind of tells you the direction of where the films should be positioned. I was a bit surprised that it was located outside the camera. I would imagine that it should actually be placed inside the camera. I'm not sure whether this is a mistake in terms of what ROLLEI intended, but I imagine it should have been positioned something like that, you know, with the film back, so that when you open up the camera for the first time, you'll know how to load it up. And if you looked at like old cameras, old vintage cameras, they actually come out like that. I'm left a bit wondering why this is outside. It's not really a sticker either. Comes with a manual. This being an international camera, of course, the instructions come in several languages. But don't worry, the instructions are actually quite foolproof and they're very simple. Most of the instructions are in pictograms. There's a QR code inside as well that will supposedly lead you to more instructions and information about the camera. But when I scanned it in, all I got was the website itself. This has been the quick unboxing. So let's quickly cover how to use the camera itself, and you can start shooting with it. So this is the quick guide on using the ROLLEI 35. Comes with a strap. If you want to, you can attach it to the side here, but otherwise you don't really need it. It requires a CR2 battery to operate. They're not difficult to find, but they're not really easy as well. You open the film door by pushing this switch all the way in. Make sure you put the plus at the plus and the minus at the minus, and close the film door and make sure it's closed by pushing it to the side there. To load the film, it's very simple. You make sure this rewind knob is at the bottom, and this is the film door catch. Make sure you pull it out and you'll be able to pull out the camera. When it's your first time, there'll be quite a bit of resistance. What you do is you just load the film, make sure a little bit of it sticks out at the side, put it all the way in, make sure it catches, close the film plate. I normally will switch the camera on, okay, and I will actually take a shot and confirm that the camera has caught the film properly by advancing the lever. Once I'm certain of that, I'll put the film door on again, okay. The first time you do this, there'll be a lot of resistance, so just make sure you close all the way. Sometimes it will bind at the front here, so just make sure you press it in, but it might bind down here as well. Just make sure you press it in as well. If it's not fully closed, there'll be a spinning lever here, such as the one you see right now, okay? But if once it's fully in, that lever will disappear. Make sure you close the film door so that it doesn't accidentally open. You can adjust the aperture at the side here, okay? And then you can adjust the shutter speed at the sides here. To know whether you're exposing your image correctly, it'll be shown on this OLED. If it is a minus, it means you're underexposing. If let's say it's okay, it means you're exposing correctly. If let's say it switches to plus, it means you're overexposing. If you wish to take with flash, then it should be this. If let's say you want to override your DX code, then you switch it to ISO and you use the self timer button at the front here to change the ISO setting. If let's say you want to take a group shot with the self timer, just press the self timer, it will glow red, and just press the shutter, it will autofocus, and then it will start blinking, and then it will blink a little bit faster, and after 10 seconds it will fire off the shot. Whenever you've taken a shot, the shutter button will depress downward and will remain as such until you advance the film advance. Sometimes if you don't advance the film advance fully, the shutter button will pop out, but you won't be able to take a shot or press it. So just make sure you go all the way, and that will enable you to press it and take the shot. When you are focusing on an image, there'll be a green light that glows here, okay? When it blinks green such as this, it means focus has not locked on. But when it's solid like this, it means focus has locked on fully. If you're taking with flash, when the flash is charging, the orange light will blink. Once it's a solid orange light, it means you are ready to take the shot, okay? And you just wait for it to fully charge. Once you're done shooting all your film shots, you will find a lot of resistance on the film advance. You may not even be able to advance it fully. In that case, don't advance it fully. You might tear the film. Just begin to re-spool the film. So what you do is you switch the rewind knob to the top, then you take out this crank and you start rewinding back. You'll feel a lot of resistance, okay? Just continue rewinding until you feel no resistance or very little resistance. Okay, you heard that. So the film has been rewound. What you do is the reverse of what you did earlier. Make sure this goes back to the bottom. Open up this catch and open up the film door. There'll be a bit of resistance and you will have your film out again. You can load another film if you want. If you're not, then just make sure you close everything back, okay? And close this latch to close the camera. Make sure the camera is off and you can put it aside. Unfortunately, being a new camera maker in this environment where there isn't really much film cameras being produced, the ROLLEI 35AF is going to be compared with many cameras. And the fact that it is a replica of the old 35 by ROLLEI, ROLLEI 35S, then it's going to be compared maybe favorably or unfavorably to this camera. Overall, when you feel it in your hands, I feel that the camera itself, of course, it doesn't have the heft of and the build quality of this camera, but overall, it doesn't feel much bigger. If, let's say I had to compare with a Pentax 17 or 17, I don't know what's the right way to pronounce it, it's actually still quite a fair bit smaller and it shoots full frame. If you look at it, it will have the same quirks the old ROLLEI 35 had. So it will have your aperture and shutter speed knobs at the front here. If I unscrew the filter here, it's a 40mm lens, so there's just a slight difference, but both of them are rated at 2.8 aperture. If you look at the back, they look very similar in design. Of course, this has the battery compartment. I'll go through that in a bit later. If you look at it from the side, this is a bit thicker. Looking at the bottom, of course, this camera does not come with a cold shoe. And looking at the top, this doesn't come with an analog meter, but this camera does come with a light meter that's positioned slightly differently, so it won't be blocked by your fingers accidentally. It does come with a flash, so in low light situations, it's going to perform a little bit better. And most importantly, it has LiDAR autofocus that will enable you to take images even at f2.8 in the dark accurately. As much as Mint used the ROLLEI trademark or name in this camera, I think it's not really fair to compare, but we will compare certain aspects such as lens designs with this camera, but we should actually look at this camera on its own and see whether it holds true to being a good camera. Alright, so we're gonna do some very scientific testing. We have a control light just behind me. We've actually placed the ROLLEI 35AF on a tripod here, and we're gonna actually compare the lens with the original from the original Carl Zeiss. We have like a sharpness target test in front. We make sure we've leveled the camera using a spirit level on all 3 axes. Same thing with the sharpness target test over there. Then we're going to do some check on how the lens distorts images as well. Then if we still have some rolls left, then of course I will actually take some bokeh tests to see if there's any difference between these 2 cameras when they shoot images at the different aperture stops. So if you're seeing us in this attire, it means we're from the future. We're just gonna fill in the missing parts on this review. So as you saw, we just did the lens review test. We've sent the film for development, we got the results back, and I've shot more than 10 rolls through the camera. So I think I'm in a great position to explain the usability about this camera. So let's go through the images first. Okay, so first thing first, let's look through the images. So I think some of the images, especially the black and white, they didn't really turn out well, but I don't think it's a fault of the camera. I think
so what film do you use for this?
I think I use FP4.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but I think this is not a fault of the camera.
You shot at what ISO, the box speed, or you pushed it?
I shot it at ISO 100.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was quite a bright and sunny day, but even then the shadows. But I think this is a lab issue. I don't think it's a camera issue. But I think the overall rendering...
dynamic range is the film issue, definitely. It can't be the camera issue.
Yeah. So I think we can kind of exclude these shots.
Yeah.
Don't really have to look through them in much detail.
Okay.
Then I shot Kodak Gold 200. I tried to shoot at 1 stop over.
Okay.
So normally if it's a ISO 200 film, I'll shoot at ISO 100. I also shot some Fuji 400.
Okay.
So that's like Ultra Max.
Okay.
But I shot it at 1 stop over, so at ISO 200.
Alright.
So these are just some shots around my neighborhood. Sharpness wise, I think the lens is pretty much there. I think you were looking through some of the images and you commented that actually it has a similar pedigree to what your Ricoh shoots similarly to, right?
Pentax engineers when they do lenses.
I guess
they have a look.
Yeah, they have a look. So Pentax lenses, they do have a specific look. So we look through the images, I think it's quite sharp. Like I can just zoom in and I can see quite a bit of detail. I think this was shot at like f16 or something.
Okay, so what film was this and where was it developed?
This was Kodak Gold. I developed at Whampoa Color Center.
Okay.
I do notice there are some artifacts in these regions here, but I think we can exclude them. Color-wise, I dig the color. It's quite accurate, I would say. Okay.
So for the artifacts, do you get them in the other scenes or it's just on this?
I think it's just on this, because this is the beginning of the roll.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if it's just in the beginning of the roll that I noticed this, because this is actually the block that's just outside my flat. Okay. So the first shot I will always take before I go on my walk when my kid is down here. Yeah. So looking at the other images, so this is further up Punggol. It has a dystopian vibe, but I guess sharpness is there on the lens. I don't have any complaints.
What f-stop did you shoot at mainly for this series?
So normally when I go out, I'll shoot at f8, but if the scene is very dark, then I may go down to 4 or 5.6.
Okay.
But usually I like to shoot it in auto. So the camera's exposure meter has been on point.
So everything is auto with a
+1
aperture.
Yeah. So I shot it 1 stop over.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the ISO was set at box speed.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct, yeah.
Just the DX, you didn't modify it?
Yes.
Okay.
The DX code remains, but I put it at A+1 on the camera, and then it just shot it at that.
Okay.
So I think the images generally look quite okay.
Okay.
The shadow details are pretty much there, but I think it's also partly due to the scanning, you know.
Okay.
Don't really have any complaints. There are some shots I did really try to take off maybe directly into the sun. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, so like this one here. So having shot directly into the sun, I did notice like very slight flaring.
Okay, so the flare control seems to be actually quite good.
Yeah, actually it is excellent.
So how I would always judge the lens, right, is that when you look at flare, you should also see the area of less contrast. So you still maintain your contrast throughout the center of the image, and you just get a bit of ghosting, which is that blue spot over there.
Yep.
Which is pretty good. And there's not much halation and weird things going on the film also.
Correct. I don't have an image here, but there was a shot I took where I shot directly into the sun.
Okay.
And I had all the details. So it was a shot similar to this. The sun was like just at the top. It was just blown out.
Okay.
But otherwise it looked fine. Okay. Looking at this image also, I think sharpness is there. Not much distortion if you look at the railings and all that. It looks
distortion looks controlled.
Yeah, the flats also, they don't have any like warping at the background there, especially at the edges. One thing I did notice is some of the film scans, they have these like hair fibers at the edges.
Okay.
So according to some of the YouTubers out there, they said it was like some of the foam near the lens.
Picked up from the camera.
From the camera itself,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
So I guess some of the shots when they are cropped, just make sure you can probably crop it out.
Okay.
Yeah, because actually the image size seems to be a little bit larger than what is normal.
So what I noticed is that the camera in the part where the lens is, when you look at it from the back, there's this fleece. So
Yes.
maybe that is the fibers from the fleece coming off. I
Yep.
think it should resolve itself after you run a few rolls through it.
Yes.
Or you could use a tape and dab it off first.
Correct, and also like it's so minor, you can probably crop it out.
Yeah, but it doesn't
Yeah.
occur on all the images, right?
Yeah, it is not. So like if I go to this image here,
Okay.
I
It's
barely
a little
notice
bit,
it.
yeah.
Yeah.
You can just crop a little bit.
And if your image is pretty much dark,
Yeah.
then it pretty much is okay.
Yeah.
We also shot some festivals. Okay, so we went to a Nine God Emperor festival.
Yeah.
So the problem with this camera is that it doesn't have a shutter release cable. It only has a self timer.
Yes.
So even though I mounted this to the railing, I couldn't really pinpoint when to actually fire off the camera because you have that 10-second delay.
Yeah.
So this, I think,
But you can't change it to like 2 seconds or 5 seconds, just 10 seconds.
it's
right?
just a 10-second delay, yeah. So even with that, like I think this image, the shutter release too early, so it's in the initial part of the
So
fireworks.
do you press the shutter or do you use the self timer?
I used the self timer, but you have to press the shutter. So you press the self timer to activate it, then you press the shutter to acknowledge that you want to take the image.
Okay.
Then there'll be a 10-second countdown, and then it'll take the image.
Okay.
So this is when actually I pressed it. I think when people were counting down at 5 seconds.
Okay.
So you know people tend to count a bit slower. 5,
Yeah.
4. Then it released at the beginning part of the
At
fireworks.
least you got something in.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
It's quite nice.
Yeah.
The
And-
AF worked.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then this I shot as soon as the first image, I knew it was gone.
You just pressed it
Yeah, I
straight away.
just pressed this straight away, and you can see like it's at the tail end. So if there had been a shutter release cable point,
Yeah.
I think it would have been useful for like long exposures like this in the night.
Actually,
Yeah.
since it's an electronic camera, they should have made a Bluetooth remote.
Yes,
Because
yes.
it was so easy to implement, so I think...
Yeah,
possible.
that could have been done.
Yeah.
And I think like this is the one of my favorite shots so
Okay.
far. So this was like it's a small little artifact that
Okay, so
people carry.
what are the settings that you use for this?
So this was shot at f2.8.
Wow, okay.
Okay, this was Sinister 800.
Okay.
But I metered the scene at 400. So I
Okay, overexposed.
overexposed one stop. Okay, and then autofocus. So I think autofocus is on point. Even though this
The guy is sharp.
yeah, the guy is sharp.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even the structure behind, it's pretty much I can guarantee you I would have never nailed this shot if I shot on a ROLLEI 35S.
You could with a laser rangefinder and then you just take your time.
Yeah, but the problem is this is moving. This is a
Yeah.
procession, so
Correct.
you can't really do it. So like for kids,
Yeah.
for moving objects, this actually supersedes the original ROLLEI 35. You know.
So for documentary work, I think this is pretty good.
Yeah, and the fact that you can use this camera one-handed.
Yeah.
The problem with using this camera one-handed is also I noticed that we have this propensity to tilt the camera ever so slightly. So I think this is something you have to get used to. So like this image here,
I think it's something that you just got to get used to for all cameras. Because when I got my F3 the first time, right, all the images were slanted. So I think it's how you hold the camera.
yeah, so this is probably a user thing.
Yeah.
But I guess as you shoot more and more, you know how to compensate a little bit, you know? Yeah, and this being a light camera, it's usually very easy to accidentally, especially when you press too hard or
Yeah, it would just like move.
yeah, you'll move a little bit.
Yeah.
Even though you're at like shooting at this, I think this was a shutter speed of 1/500.
So I think the issue is far greater for smaller cameras. So this GR3, right, it does have an automatic horizon compensation of up to a few degrees. So I guess they already expect you to like tilt the camera as you press it because it's so small.
Yep.
So it will automatically correct if it's within the range. So I think it's something that happens quite regularly with a small and light camera.
Yeah, so I think it's just it just is very light. That's the problem lah, you know. Looking at some of the other images, I like the color rendering, all that
the
looks
colours
fine.
looks accurate. I don't think it has cast or anything.
Yeah.
The vignetting is also quite minimal, surprisingly,
Yes.
for such a small camera and small lens.
Yes. So I guess having seen the images, right? I guess most of us will be concerned with the lens comparison.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that's what, before I go to that, I guess like I also tried out the flash. So
Okay.
I tried it out on my kid and my wife.
Okay.
So I think it seems to expose pretty well
Okay.
with flash in auto mode.
Okay.
No complaints there. So this was in a dark cafe, so it came out well illuminated.
So does it have the slow shutter mode for the flash? Can you like do the mode where it drags the shutter speed with the flash?
Because it's a manual camera, I think you can put it into any setting.
Okay. So you can manually do it.
Yes. Yeah, so I think if you want to do a slow shutter, then don't put it on auto mode.
Yeah.
You know, so just shoot as how you would normally. Then you
Okay.
can drag the shutter, make like motion blur and all that. You
It's
know.
more advanced for more advanced users.
Yeah. But for people who just want to shoot live stills quickly, this is a fantastic camera. So let's look at the sharpness table. So we shot Kodak 200 under very controlled lighting. Okay, we use like bubble level on the camera. We use a bubble level on the frame that we were taking with the sharpness target. Make sure everything is as
flat and
precise as we can. But I would still consider us amateurs, but not amateurs to the degree that we're taking sharpness tests without a tripod, you know?
Yeah.
So all this was on a tripod. The problem is these two lenses are slightly different. So the ROLLEI 35S is a 40mm lens. This is a 35mm lens. We did try to compensate the distance by 10 cm, but even then you have some parallax errors.
Yeah.
So just take all this with a pinch of salt.
So when we took the shots, we tried to fill the frame as much as possible.
Yes,
right?
correct.
We wanted the edges to be at the edge of the test chart.
Correct. But also there were the limits that our test chart is of maximum this size.
Yes.
And the camera has a minimum focusing distance. And we didn't want to be at the minimum focusing distance. So we just compensated a little and tried to take as much as we could.
So it's not super scientific, but I think it's the best out there.
Yeah, so let's look through the images, okay? So I think we can start. So the top images are the ROLLEI 35S, okay? And the bottom is the ROLLEI 35AF. It's all labeled there. I think we'll try to link these images in the comments down below or somewhere. So actually, if you look at it, I think there's a very little pin cushion distortion, very minor. But honestly, looking at them side by side, it looks...
I mean, to the naked eye, it looks okay.
Yeah.
Because if you block it,
you
could send this through some software to analyze properly, but can't be bothered because it's film.
Yeah. But actually, if you look at the edges, you'll see the slight pin cushion.
But it's so slight, actually, I am not concerned about it.
Yeah, it's really tiny. And this was shot at f16, you know. We didn't really take the other shots, but I guess this is as...
But the good news is that there's not much in terms of a complex distortion where it's like, you know, sometimes there's weird bubble in the middle and the sides are different.
Or like something is in focus, something's totally out of focus and all that,
So how about the flatness of the focus plane? We'll look at that later.
Yeah. So actually this camera itself, it doesn't have a f22. So the f22 is a standalone. But I think let's start from the very beginning.
Okay.
So we shot it at all the aperture stops that they could coincide. We made sure the light was appropriate so that both cameras can shoot at the relevant aperture. So that's why we shot the first image at f/over 250. For the ROLLEI 35S, we could put an external shutter release. For the ROLLEI 35AF, we used the self-timer mode. So it would have minimal distortion. Okay.
So just to clarify, your ROLLEI 35S lens is made by Zeiss, right?
Yes, it's a Carl Zeiss lens.
It's not a ROLLEI lens.
Not sure what a ROLLEI lens is also.
But it says ROLLEI lens on the ROLLEI 35AF.
Yeah. So I guess there's a slight color cast to the Carl Zeiss lens. It looks a bit more green, but it could be just the white balance, you know. The ROLLEI 35, it looks a lot more black in nature.
Okay, so let's zoom in and have a closer look. So let's see the center of this one. What do you feel it looks like? So you can see up to maybe a number 8 on the center part.
I think number 8. Another thing, maybe I'll just zoom out a bit, is you can actually compare the text on top. So if you compare the text here and you compare the text here, you can see the difference in the sharpness. It's very obvious at f2.8.
So in the center, roughly, we see a number 8-ish. Then on the 35S, I think
we can barely make up. To be fair also, the ROLLEI is a 40mm lens, so that would have a bigger image on the film plane itself, you know. But there's a slight vignetting also, okay? Not very obvious here, okay? But I guess once you stop down a little, things improve significantly, okay? Even down here, I guess you can compare. Like now, you can see up to about 5 or 4.
4.5,
around there. Then if you go up to the Zeiss lens, you can go
see it to 6.5.
Yeah, 6.5 more or less.
You
Yeah.
can see quite a lot more resolution on the Zeiss at wide open.
Yeah, so if you want a sharp lens, I think it goes without saying the Carl Zeiss is going to be unbeaten in this sense. And
Okay, so before we move on to the next one, right, we should also compare the center and the corner resolution. So for the 35S, how would you rate this center versus corners? Because we can see the corners over here.
I think it's quite even, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't see like there's being a drop off in sharpness at the edges.
It's not very significant.
Yeah, it's not very significant. It seems to be following through quite well.
Okay.
When we look at the ROLLEI 35AF, it looks actually quite similar as well. As in, it's not as sharp as the Carl Zeiss.
But we can see that the corners and the center are roughly
Equally
similar.
blur, yeah. Compared to the Carl Zeiss.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even then, I think like it's just a hair less sharp based on the test chart. Like one is 4+, one is 6+, you know. It's not say too significant. Yeah. So we can I think maybe we'll go down. Okay. I think let's skip the F4. Let's go to F8. I think that's where most of the sharpness should be.
5.6. Yeah, 5.6. We can see quite a significant increase already.
Yes. I think the Carl Zeiss part especially is super sharp, you know.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it goes a little bit beyond the 8 down here. Even down here, it's I think a bit more than the 6+.
We might be resolving more than the scanner can scan already.
Yeah, it could be that, or as in they were both sent to this. Okay, to do this test really well, you need a low ISO film. We use Kodak Go to be fair. Okay, you should probably shoot it in ADOX 20, black and white, you know, and then self-develop, self-scan with a proper scanner. But this was all commercially done. But I think as long as we carry forward the same errors from part 1 to part 2, I think
because we're not comparing absolute values, we're just comparing like
relative. Yeah. So I think this test is more than satisfactory to do that. Yeah, but this is where like you'll start noticing the sharpness of the corners being a bit better. Yeah. Even down here, they're super sharp. You know. But down here, as in it is sharper. But
you can see improvement in the corners.
Yes.
As you stop down, definitely.
Correct. But it's not to the level of the Carl Zeiss lens. You know, you can just compare, though they're opposing corners, you can compare the top and bottom. You'll notice, you can see the difference. You know, it's very obvious. Yeah. Other than that, I think as we go further down,
even to F8, right? I would say that the 35S has sharpened greatly at F8 for the corners. You can see the text at the corners here.
Yeah.
This is way sharper than at 5.6.
Correct.
Even the text on the top is also sharper.
Yeah. So I think as you stop down, it's just going to get sharper, you know, until a certain point where diffraction starts coming into play.
Even F11 is even sharper still.
Yes. Yeah. So, and the thing is, all these results, it kind of lends me to wonder whether the autofocus is really accurate. Because for the ROLLEI 35S, we use the measuring tape. We make sure it's precise. The camera doesn't have like a film plane marker, but we roughly estimate it so that it be as accurate as possible. But for the ROLLEI 35AF, we let the LiDAR sensor choose the distance and shoot, you know. So I wonder if because we're stopping down, it's getting sharper because the AF is a bit off and the depth of field is coming into play.
Compensating for that.
Yeah, but as in, the difference is so subtle.
I mean, we wouldn't know because we
Yeah.
can't measure the exact calibration without like knowing what the readings of the sensor is also.
Of course, you guys can always do the test yourself and see whether you can figure out if there's really a discrepancy. Personally, I think maybe we're taking the camera a little too seriously. It's a fun camera. But I think it's just interesting to look through all these results.
Yeah, so at F16, I think we can see the diffraction coming in already.
Yes.
It's slightly less sharp already, even on the old 35S.
Yeah.
And it's slightly worse again on the 35AF. So F16, I think you shouldn't really use it unless absolutely necessary for exposure.
Yep.
Doesn't make your images sharper. So
ROLLEI 35AF, I think if you can stay at F8, F11, that would be the sharpest as possible that you probably can get, you know? We also did a test on the bokeh. So I did this test at home. Similarly, I put the rabbit as the focus. So once again, it's a little bit hard to compare these tests because they're two different lenses. And now we're comparing bokeh, which is the background.
Yep.
So I did try to compensate by moving the ROLLEI a bit differently.
Exposure is also a little bit different. Your old ROLLEI is a bit darker.
Yes.
So yeah.
But surprisingly, on the light meter, they matched.
Okay.
Yeah, so even though I took the shots after one another, they seem to match one another. So I think maybe the ROLLEI tends, maybe some coatings has deteriorated, or I don't know. Yeah, but it does seem to...
It does seem to be a little bit darker.
Correct. Yeah.
Or it might have been more contrasty.
Yeah, it could have been more contrasty. Yeah, and then the scanner doing its auto features would just... So you'll notice that the rabbit looks bigger in the ROLLEI 35AF. It's because it's actually a wider lens, and I actually tried to crop the images based on the background. So it kind of forces me to go closer into the subject, which is the rabbit here.
So I think we don't look at the subject, we just look at the background.
Correct.
The subject is just there to verify that it's in focus on the subject.
Correct, yeah. So actually, if you look at the bokeh, they look kind of similar, you know? I didn't do like a bokeh test on the like on lights, all this. Actually, I did, but the camera failed midway through. The ROLLEI 35AF.
Talk about that later.
We talk about that later. Yeah, but I guess bokeh wise, they're kind of similar, like when you look from the trees and all that, you know.
The bokeh on the 35S is definitely a bit smoother. We can still see details on the windows on the 35AF.
Yes.
But on the 35S is totally blown out on the 2.8.
Yep. And the 35S should have been out resolving it, if anything. So the fact that,
Also, 35S is a 40mm.
Yeah.
So you will get definitely more bokeh when you shoot at the same f-stop.
Yes.
So that's a bit different over there.
Yeah. So as you go down, you can compare the bokeh. I think we can leave the viewers to compare and make their own judgment on this. This is also just a relative test. It's not an absolute test, okay? I don't think we have... as in, to me, they look very similar. I don't see much difference in characteristics. I don't see like...
Even as we stop down, it looks roughly the same. I don't think one is inferior to the other.
Yeah.
But you get a slightly more depth of field for the 35AF because it's a 35mm opposed to a 40mm.
Yes. And honestly, when looking at it like this, I can't really tell the huge difference in sharpness. You know, whereas when I look at the test chart, it's very obvious. But down here, I honestly think it's no different. Like if you ask me in a blind test, I might nail maybe some. I might get some of the shots right. But But side by side, I don't think as a user you would notice any difference.
In fact, in this scene, right, with f8, you might say that the 35AF actually looks sharper.
Yep.
Because there's a little bit more depth of field.
Correct.
It does look sharper than the 35S.
Yes. So So I think this is, and bokeh is a very subjective thing. Some people like a certain look, some people don't.
But I would say that there's not a significant strong look to it. So I think both are
equal.
I wouldn't say one is better or worse than the other.
Yeah. So personally, to me also, they look the same. I don't see any difference. And even like F22, we can't really compare. But F16, the depth of field more or less is more or less consistent lah, you know.
So the lens is not a vintage lens design per se where everything looks washed out, soft and swirly. It's still a modern good lens like the ROLLEI 35S. So I think well done there. They didn't go for the Lomo look.
I think they did have intentional decision on this, and I think I think this is why a lot of the users hate the camera, but once they get the images, it makes them rethink everything. And I personally also went through that, you know? Like when I look at the usability, the build quality, all this, I did wonder what... This is going to be a bit like a Holga camera, you know? Half my images going to be duds.
It's so clunky, you expect the lens to be clunky too. But actually, it turned out quite good. I would be happy to use this lens, but it's designed by Pentax.
They have a pedigree in this.
And made in a modern way, so I don't think it can be that bad.
So I think that's the review. We'll link these images down below, so you all can take a look. As I said, these are just amateur testing. But I guess this is as professional as we've seen it so far. Let's meet up with past Prash and he'll continue the review. Alright, so let's talk about the build quality. After watching all the reviews, I'm sure you all done it as well. I was expecting it to be terrible. I was expecting it to actually feel like a lomography reloadable camera, but honestly, after feeling it, it doesn't feel so bad. It feels kind of like the Pentax 1.7, but maybe the build quality feels a little bit more cheaper. So first thing first, the camera comes with this kind of lens cap. It's a plastic lens cap that's friction coated. So obviously there's a foam here that actually enables it to be held on the lens by friction. I wish it was a clip-on lens, or I don't know whether this is a controversial opinion, but I feel viewfinder cameras should never come with a lens cap. They should come with like a UV filter or something already screwed on. This camera, as you know by now, doesn't have any filter threads, so I'm not sure whether Mint will make some proprietary threads that will enable you to use filters on this camera. It has two knobs at the front here. These two knobs enable you to adjust the aperture here or the shutter speed. For those of you who've used a ROLLEI 35 camera, you will know that you have to press this lever here at the bottom so that you can turn the aperture. But that's not really the case with the ROLLEI 35AF. You can actually turn it without pressing the lever. So I do wonder why that was even placed. Maybe it's a homage to the old design, but I feel like the fact that you're making something new, you gotta improve on it a little bit. And if you're gonna do that, then maybe you should just remove it, you know, especially if it doesn't serve any function. When I feel the resistance here and I feel the resistance here, they are completely different. This, as you can see, I'm having a bit more difficulty turning. This is the shutter speed knob. Okay, for those of you, maybe this angle is a bit better. You can see actually the shutter speeds on the knob. It is a lot harder to turn. I wish that they had fine-tuned their manufacturing such that they were either equally easy or equally difficult to turn, so that it doesn't feel odd that there's this difference. At the front of these knobs, you will find some film indicator. This will help you to position and remember how many shots you had in the roll. Down here, you can move it and choose which. And it's just basically just reminders lah. But personally, I find them quite useless in the original ROLLEI. And if it were me, I would have removed this from the current design as well. Another thing I noticed is for me to turn the inner dial here, it requires a lot of force just to turn it, but it does stay where it should stay. Whereas the dial here, the reminder dial, actually at f16, there's still a bit of friction, so it's a bit hard to turn. It will stay at its position, but when I move the whole dial to f2.8, I can actually move it easily. So I think this goes back to its build quality. It's just not there, or the tolerances are still not there yet. At the front, of course, you'll see the self timer button here is a bit scratched up because I've been using it for a while. This is where the LiDAR autofocus happens. This is the flash, so that is something new that the original ROLLEI 35 did not have. Of course, this is your viewfinder. And actually, it's great that they position the light meter right here as opposed to at the corner here like the original ROLLEI 35. So the problem was when you were holding the camera, sometimes you would actually accidentally cover the light meter here, and this would prevent you from taking an accurate exposure. So the fact that they position it there, I think that's an improvement. As you know by now, the screw that was here dropped out, so I will contact Mint, I guess, and figure out what to do about that. If you ask me about the build quality, as I told you, it's a bit iffy. The most common complaint most people have is actually opening the film back. So the first time I did there was a lot of resistance, but the more and more I've used this camera, the more and more this resistance has actually reduced. So now I pretty much can close almost fully without much issue. But the first time I did it, of course, there was a lot of resistance just to open it up. Then when I tried to close it, I had to press this part in so that it wouldn't catch on this bar. And then once it's closed, I have to press this part in just to close it. The buttons, the autofocus, all that, I have no qualms. I'm actually pleasantly surprised by the sound of the autofocus, because anyone who's used Mint cameras before, you will know that Mint's motors sound like death. So if you use one of their instant cameras, I think you know what I'm talking about. You know, if you know, you know. Yeah. But other than that, I think the build quality is okay. It's not as great as I was hoping for, but it's not as bad as I would say the reviews have mentioned. When I rewind the film lever, I have no qualms or so. I think It's obviously not going to be as good as your original ROLLEI 35, but it's not too bad. It's pretty okay. If I compared it to the Pentax 1.7, I would say the Pentax 1.7 has a nicer feel in the film advance as well. I guess that's the issues with the build quality so far. Future Prash again. So let's cover the usability. I've shot more than 10 rolls through this, so I think I'm in a great position to explain a little bit about the camera. So let's look at the main gripe. It's actually the film placement and taking it out. If you compare the different rolls of film, you'll notice that actually plastic canisters, they are a bit different from the metal one. They have a bit different build tolerance. So this is a metal one by Kodak. This is a plastic one. So if you put them side by side, you'll notice the plastic one is a bit thicker. So when you insert these rolls into the camera, you'll notice that it's a little bit hard to put in and take out. Another thing you'll probably notice is once your battery has died, if let's say you want to take out open the film door, this is an exercise in patience because it's really very difficult. Sometimes I have to use a plier to pull it out. I do wish that they had spring-loaded this, that way it wouldn't come out. So now it's actually unlocked, but it doesn't open, you know? It's not easy to do, and I have to use my nails to really grip. I'm just gonna lock it so that it's easier to use. The film advance, I think it takes quite a bit of getting used to, okay? Some people do complain that it's hard to use. I have to agree, compared to a ROLLEI 35S. It does feel a bit janky, not very consistent. Sometimes it also feels like you're almost tearing the film. Taking the images and then advancing the film, you'll feel quite a lot of resistance compared to the ROLLEI 35S. And before you even advance the film fully, the button pops up. So far, it has this auto lock feature where it's a bit smart and it doesn't activate, so you have to fully advance the film before you can actually shoot. That's good. But having said that, I think one of our friends, he did have a film, one of the frames being missed. I had a double exposure where it was like slightly overlapping. So I think due to some build tolerance issue, even the film advance isn't really that well made. The OLED screen in bright sunlight isn't very clear. Its positioning also is a little bit less, isn't really well positioned, I would say. Because when you put your finger here, because you're going to be walking around like this, it's a little bit hard to read off any information there. So the problem with this camera is that all the information with regards to exposure is on this OLED screen. It will tell you if you're overexposing, underexposing. So when you're in auto mode, it kind of just tells you you're in auto mode, which is kind of pointless. I think it should just tell you how many shots you've left or how many shots you've taken. And the thing is, your finger will cover it. So when it's covered, you can't really tell if I'm overexposing or underexposing. Another thing that you may encounter because of the positioning of the OLED screen is that when you tend to meter a scene, when you half press, you might actually be facing the camera slightly upright, something like this. So if you're shooting a landscape scene, you might be exposing the light meter to a bit too much light. So just make sure when you're looking at the OLED screen, you keep it as parallel to the subject that you're going to take, and then you half press, and then you have to make sure your finger is positioned a bit out of the way. Looking at the dials in front, I'm not really complaining about them. I do like the fact that there's an auto mode, but the problem is this auto mode is also reflected here, which I find pointless. I rather that they tell me as I said, the number of frames left or any other usable information like overexposure, underexposure. Another thing I noticed in auto mode is I do not know what shutter speed is being used. The fact that this camera goes from, I think, 60 seconds in long exposure, I think in normal modes it goes from 1 second to 1/500, which gives it a big latitude for auto exposure. Maybe Mint can come out and fine-tune that a bit. I wish there would be a minimum shutter speed when you're using it handheld and putting it in auto mode, because you don't want to be taking half-second shots indoors, because that's going to just turn out completely unusable. The dials, they turn fine, but I did notice that mine turns easily for the aperture and it's very stiff on the side of the shutter speed. Even the dials here that indicate which type of film that needs to be, that's inside the camera is annoying. I can't really move it. Down here, it moves too easily. So I find it pointless. I don't need to know how many shots the film roll has. I do wish that at the back here, there was maybe a cutout to see the actual cartridge that is inside, because you can't really tell once you place the film into the camera. Otherwise, using it, autofocus is quite fast, okay? It seemed a bit loud in some of the YouTube videos, but honestly, it's not very loud. It's very... It won't be noticeable. Like if you're in a street setting, no one will notice it. Speed-wise, I would say it's okay. It's not the fastest. My Konica Hexa, of course, being faster. But if I compare to my Nikon 35 Ti, this is a slightly bit faster than that, and it focuses a bit better. Exposure has been on point. I have no real complaints. Back to the auto focus, it has nailed almost every shot that I've taken. The only shots that I missed is user error. I framed it a bit wrongly, and the LiDAR sensor probably was a bit wrong. Based on the sharpness test, you would have noticed us maybe mentioning that we do wonder the accuracy of the LiDAR autofocus, but so far, day-to-day use, I have no real complaints on it. I do wish this camera came with a hot shoe or cold shoe. If we had a hot shoe or cold shoe, we could actually put a piece of paper to demarcate or inform us of the film that we have put in the camera, or maybe a film plate at the back just to remind us of that. At the bottom of the camera, of course, you have your usual tripod socket. No real biggie there. It does what it's intended to. This film advance is very difficult to use. If you use the ROLLEI 35S camera, you'll notice that film advance is already very difficult. This is even tighter than this. Sometimes you do feel like you're tearing the film when you're rewinding it back. There's a lot of resistance. The lens itself, it comes with, of course, their proprietary cover. It doesn't have any filter threads built in. The problem with this lens cover is there's a foam inside. It's friction fit. Sometimes when I'm like just holding the camera, it just drops simply like that. So I do wish they had changed this. I mentioned before, I don't know whether it's a hot take. I feel viewfinder cameras should not come with a lens cover. They should just come with maybe like a UV filter over it, because sometimes you just don't know you have a lens cover on, and then you go around taking images and half of them are just duds because your lens cap is still on. As a user coming from a ROLLEI 35S, I do like using this camera, but the problem is they copied everything from the ROLLEI 35S. They copied the good and the bad and the ugly. So I feel like some of the design choices were a bit questionable. They could have been foregone, and some things could have been modernized. They did leave out also like the external shutter release cable slot. I wish they had included that, or as Ian pointed out, maybe they should have just enabled a Bluetooth version so that we could take the shots. You can sort of like compensate for it by using the self-timer button, but you might lose the actual moment that you want to take the shot. This camera does come with a flash, so it's perfect for indoor shots where light is minimal. You can just go around taking the shot. Battery life seems excellent. I haven't really had any qualms. After 10 rolls, I think I only changed the battery once. And I've been shooting pretty okay. Just remember to leave it switched off when you're not using it so that the battery doesn't drain too fast. Viewfinder wise, it is clear, but it's not as clear as the ROLLEI. The frame lines are also a bit bulbous in nature, so you might find it imprecise to use. I do wish that they had included two frame lines, one for focus at infinity and one for at minimum focus, so you could roughly estimate how to frame your subjects a little bit better. The positioning of the sensors are much better than the ROLLEI 35S, because you don't end up blocking the light meter. Normally, if you put your finger here and hold it like that, sometimes you might end up blocking the light meter on the ROLLEI 35S. But these are basically my usability, I guess, complaints, and I guess the wins of this camera. Let's continue on with the review with Prash. Okay, so this is a camera that's going to be a little bit polarizing, but the amazing thing is, I guess Pentax engineers have been responsible for 3 cameras in the past year or so. I think the Polaroid i2, the Pentax 1.7, and of course the ROLLEI 35AF. Whether this camera is for you remains to be seen. It has its own quirks, it has its own pros as well. Whether you can overlook them, that's up to you. If you ask me, this is a camera. By the way, this is not a sponsored video. I paid for it. I enjoy using this camera and I probably will continue to use this camera. But you gotta understand where I'm coming from. I'm an existing ROLLEI 35 user. So the fact that it has autofocus, that's a game changer for me. For once in my life, I don't have to keep shooting this camera at f8 and hope that I nail focus. I can actually consider bringing this camera to a concert, seeing my favorite artist or whoever perform, and just try to take a photo. And the fact that it does not look professional means that there's a high chance I can actually bring this camera in with me. The biggest hurdle, I guess, is the price. We've been spoiled in this market of vintage cameras for a very long time. The digital revolution has enabled like digital cameras to be priced at a point where the price of these cameras seems expensive. If you factor in the price, I think this is going for $799 to about $899. Depending on your location, your tax, all this, it might be a bit more expensive, it might be a bit cheaper, but it comes very, very close to maybe a GR3, depending on where you're staying. And whether you can justify that sort of expense on a camera like this remains to be seen. Ian and I, we spoke about this briefly as well, but these cameras, they involve the fact that it's their first iteration, so there's going to be R&D costs that probably Mint cannot just release on a whole suite of cameras, you know. The production run is probably going to be limited, so the R&D cost is going to add up. The fact that Mint also has tied up with ROLLEI, I don't know what their back end, you know, how much they're going to pay for licensing of the name and all that. The other thing is whether this camera is worth it. I think Ian and I, we've spoken many times, there's no really a good camera or bad camera. It's just whether a question of the camera being priced correctly. If you ask me, it's a tad too expensive for its build quality and what it does. If it had been me, I would have priced it just ever so slightly more expensive than the Pentax 1.7. I think that is where its sweet spot would be. Maybe if it had been like 100 USD or 200 even cheaper, then I think it would be a no-brainer. This would be the camera to get. Your Pentax 1.7, I would say it's not worth getting as well. Ian, would you get this camera?
No.
No, so I don't think this is the camera for Ian, but if you ask me, this is the camera for me. I've enjoyed using it. I've been bringing it out on my walks with my kid. The fact that it has autofocus, I don't have to really worry about objects moving fast. So small children or things at night time, this camera has done exceptionally well. I do wish that they could improve on it. There are certain things they left out, such as the cold shoe, a film reminder plate, even an external shutter release cable. That would have been nice. But I think that's a problem because this camera doesn't know where it belongs. The Pentax 1.7 is very clear. It's a camera for beginners. Every design choice that has been made is for beginners. This camera has certain features that make it easy to use that would actually propel it to a premium point-and-shoot camera, which would also make it a fantastic beginner camera with these automatic features. But the fact that it has certain quirks that only a seasoned user of vintage cameras would know, such as how the amount of pressure you should use to close the back, loading the film, how to expose properly, the fact that it's only has certain indications within the viewfinder. I think these are things that makes you wonder whether this was targeted for beginners, for hobbyists, or who is it targeted for? Ultimately, I think it's a labor of love. I think, Gary, if this is your first camera, I'm looking forward to the next iteration. I think what would have been nice is for whoever supported the Pioneer batch of cameras to get some kind of, you know, recognition or like a card or something. Polaroid used to have like Pioneer cards for those who supported them in their infancy when they were just starting off as the Impossible project. I think something like that for the ROLLEI 35 would have been nice. I know there's a degree of xenophobia in the world, but I would also have loved if when you paid homage to the original ROLLEI 35 that this also mentioned that it was made in China or Hong Kong, depending on how you want to look at it. Other than that, I think it's a great camera. It has some quirks. Whether these quirks are things you can live with or are deal breakers you have to decide for yourself. If you ask me again, I probably will get this camera again.